Death, apocalypse, and renewal is the topic for today. From the standpoint of the Hermetica, death is more a transition than anything else. And so I wanted to give you a few readings from that and then talk also about not only personal, but collective death as well. Something that's very much up for our time. So the Corpus Hermeticum, Book 11, tells us death is not the destruction of what has been put together, but the dissolution of the union. So not destruction, but dissolution. This is a parallel, by the way, to alchemy, which I'm going to talk about in the next video. Dissolution is a key alchemical process. And so from the Hermetic standpoint, when we die, we dissolve back into everything. It's a very ecological view, actually. Life withdraws into both the unmanifest, which is the spirit goes to its home, and then the body goes to its home, which is the world, and dissolves. And the same book 11 also says, and if you wish to break through all this, and not in the sense of somehow bypassing it, but breakthrough in terms of if you wish to understand what all this really means and how it works, and to contemplate what is beyond. And it says, if there's anything beyond the cosmos, then it is in your power. We can actually understand what's happening, at least to some extent. And the reference to beyond the cosmos reminds us that in many Hermetic texts, nous, creative consciousness, the spark of the divine in us, is actually older than the cosmos itself. Another quotation, this one comes from book 15. Death is disillusion, that new creatures may come to be. So death is seen as a necessary process so that new things can happen. And you'll notice that archetypally speaking, whenever death happens, there's also a birth, and vice versa. When we're born into something new, then something else has to die. They both work together always. And it goes on to say nothing can be destroyed. Also, for corruption followeth every generation, that it may again be generated. So they have their eye on the longer view, not just death and period, but they're always asking what happens after this? What happens as a consequence of this? What renewal is taking place? Same thing when entire groups die. And in the Asclepius, otherwise known as the Perfect Discourse, there's a section called the Lament. And it's a bit of an apocalyptic lament. And what it foretells, or it could have been written after the fact, so maybe it didn't foretell anything. But I think what it addresses is true beyond Egypt, although Egypt specifically is what this passage is about. But I think some version of this happens whenever big systems and even entire civilizations die. For darkness will be preferred to light. It will be thought better to die than to live. None will raise his eyes toward heaven. The pious man will be thought mad. The impious wise. The frenzied will be thought brave. The worst criminal a good man. Sounds about like now. It goes on and says, the gods will separate themselves from us. Deplorable divorce. Only the evil angels will remain, who will mingle with us and constrain us by violence. To all the excesses of criminal audacity, engaging in wars, brigandage, frauds, and in everything which is contrary to the nature of the soul. Then the earth will lose its equilibrium. The sea will no longer be navigable. The heaven will no longer be full of stars. The stars will stop their courses in heaven. Every divine voice will be silenced and will be silent. The fruits of the earth will molder. The soul will no longer be fertile, and the air will grow thick with a lugubrious torpor. So after that bad news, it says that God will annihilate malice by consuming it with fire and pestilence. And then, quote, God will bring back the world to its first beauty, so that this world may again be worthy of reverence and admiration. In my presentations and some of my classroom teaching, I talk about that archetype of the apocalypse. And one of the things I always mention is that apocalypse, understood archetypally, especially when we look into different traditions, isn't just a drop off. It's not just death and everything's done. It seems to be a two-phase movement where first there's some sort of a descent as all the things that don't serve anymore drop away. And that's the hardest part in some ways, because it seems like everything is crazy. Reminds me a lot of the Indian version of this in the form of the Kali Yuga. There is a Mayan version of this from the Popol Vuh, a number of books. There's a Sami version of this. The different traditions that speak to this archetype, not all of them, but they usually emphasize that there's a necessary death period and then renewal. Ragnarok is the same way in Norse mythology. So it could be that by way of diffusion, all this actually goes back to Egypt, because there's a very old tradition of apocalyptic prophecy in Egypt. There is the admonitions of Ipuwer, there's the prophecy of Nefertiti, there's Middle Kingdom texts that deal with this imagery. And then later, in the Common Era, in 391, the cult of Isis came to a formal end because of Theodosius, who is the same emperor who made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And this actually, 391 was the same year that the Serapeum in the Alexandrian library was destroyed. So there was a lot of wreckage going on. But as a result of all this, other libraries and wisdom centers spring up, and Isis and her cult spread all over the world. So that's the longer view. Something similar in Gnosticism, where there's the cataclysm of the descent of Sophia, and descent and fragmentation, all her sparks of spirit go into everything, including you and me. That's the first act. But the second act is, how will those who know reassemble the sparks? Kabbalah has a similar idea. Some versions of it do. So this also leads us, by the way, to the theme of sacrifice. And, it's a Jungian point that if we don't make the small sacrifices along the way, if we don't get rid of attitudes that don't serve, on a cultural level, institutions that don't serve, belief systems, things like that, then the big sacrifices will be extracted from us. So to the extent that we make the descent into the underworld ourselves, we alleviate a little bit of the need for all of us to descend literally. So in connection with all this apocalyptic imagery and renewal imagery, we should touch a little bit on time, which was something that appears as a topic in several of the documents of the Hermetica. And to kind of get us in that direction, there's a point from a famous point from Ecclesiastes 3, where it says, there's a time for everything. You've probably heard this, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. And that cyclical view is shared by Hermeticism, that all of this goes in cycles. It's not linear. And in fact, the word that we would translate into English as eternity, and the word is aion, it appears 27 times in the Corpus Hermeticum. Aion was the supreme god of Mithraism, a time god, and resembles a Persian god who is similar. He was the god of boundless time, and also a Phoenician god. There's time gods in many different cultures. And so it's interesting to think of time itself as somehow sentient, as a power, a sentient power. And there is some speculation now in the physics community that, and in fact, at this point, I think it's more than speculation, We know that since Einstein, that space and time are actually space-time, and that when the universe was big banging, and that it wasn't like an empty room where there's a big ball of plasma going outward. That was the universe. There's nothing beyond it, according to this way of thinking. And so not only space, but time are unfolding, and still are, by the way, it's still going on. So the speculation, though, or the thinking about this is that time is actually generating gravity, so to speak, that time is responsible for gravity as well. Time is primal. In any case, in the Hermetica, there's a phrase from book 11 of the Corpus that I think is a nice little summary of where they came down on this whole issue of time and what's its relationship to the cosmos and to us. And the sentence is, the essence of eternity is unchanging identity, of the cosmos order, of time change, of generation, life and death. Therefore, eternity is in God, the cosmos in eternity, time in the cosmos, and generation in time. It's a lovely way to put it. It all works together. It's all a cosmic economy in which we too are members. So there's something that I find beautiful about the idea that even with things like personal and collective death, it's part of the rhythm. It's part of what Pythagoras called the music of the spheres. That doesn't mean it's determined, but it means that it's accounted for somehow. So to finish, we've got something from the Discourse on the 8th and the 9th, which was one of the Hermetic documents discovered in 1945 at Nag Hammadi. And most of the collection that was unearthed from the jar in the desert there was Gnostic documents. And there were a few Hermetic pieces included as well. This one was really key because it confirmed a lot of what we suspected about Hermetic thought and practice and visionary experience. So it's an important document. If there were, a 5 or 6, like I said for Gnosticism earlier, a 5 or 6 key documents for Hermeticism, this would be one of them. And so the idea here is that if we can get some feel for what they call big mind, for the cosmos as a great thought, as a structure that makes sense, then it helps us understand transition better. Not in the sense of trying to ward it off or think positively about it, but to live with it. So here's the quotation. Whoever sees himself by the power of mind, with a capital M, recovers his essential self and becomes assimilated to the self-begotten human. That means we see ourselves in the context of the primal pattern, the anthropos figure, the primal archetypal blueprint by which, according to old Hermetic stories, we were produced. We're copies of that blueprint, just as that blueprint is a copy of Big Mind. So let me read it again. Whoever sees himself by the power of this mind recovers his essential self and becomes assimilated to the self-begotten human. Then he can also see the source of the unbegotten one, namely nous. So when we understand at that deep level what's really happening, then we can take up a stand toward it and realize that we're part of this great flux and that it moves in cycles.